To go from like reporting on stop signs in a small town to now I'm on MTV2 Canada. My first assignment was to shadow. Remember the rapper Chingy?
Of course, yeah.
He had the song Right There.
Yeah.
My first assignment, second day of work, was to shadow him.
Chris, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, Ross, thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, man. It's a pleasure to have you on here. And you know, that background looks familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. If anyone's ever seen any of my YouTube videos, this is the background in my videos, and also the background in the interview that you did with Elena, which when I saw that, I'm like, you did the interview with like the wrestling belts in the background? Like you could have filled these shelves with things you like, but that was nice of her to do that.
Tell us what's going on there for the people watching on YouTube. What belts do we have back there?
So these are we'll start at the top here. We've got a Rey Mysterio mask, a boot autographed by Ric Flair. Here's one of the Emmys I won here. Then we got the current WWE Championship, the ECW Championship. This is the Winged Eagle, the old WWF Championship. This one's actually autographed by a wrestler. Maybe you've heard of him. His name's Hulk Hogan.
Wow.
And then at the bottom, we have the tag team championships there. And I don't know, like I'm a giant wrestling fan, but also a giant wrestling nerd. So this is just like one little corner of my nerddom here.
The shrine. I love it. And then you have a piece of artwork behind you. Is that a magazine cover?
Yeah, so this is a magazine cover autographed by The Rock, and then a photo underneath is one of the interviews I did with The Rock. So he's someone I always looked up to when I was in the late '90s when he was really tearing it up in the wrestling world. Now he's tearing it up in the movie world, in the entrepreneurial world, and he's just such an inspiration for me and for so many other people.
Yeah.
And then below that, that's the YouTube plaque that means a lot, I feel like that's something, as you know, YouTube is this like personal grind that you're doing like every moment of every day. And, to have subscribers actually tune into the videos you make, it's like, oh my God, I feel so grateful for this opportunity.
Yeah, it really is. And I definitely look up to you and what you're doing in the YouTube space. I definitely have some questions for you. So for some tips and some tricks, because you have definitely figured out the YouTube game, and produced some awesome content.
Well, thank you. And it's been a mission. I started my YouTube channel in 2011, really started putting some work into it. I'd say 2-ish years ago, but man, it's a grind, and YouTube's a needle in a haystack, and you're throwing it out there and you're just kind of hoping that someone's digging through that hay and they find your needle.
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a grind. And I think one of the frustrating moments for me as a content creator, and I struggle with this honestly, Chris, is creating content, pouring like my heart and soul into it, and then publishing it on public platforms and getting no hits, no views, no interaction, and it's just like gut wrenching, like I work so hard on this, and social is just such a noisy space nowadays. It's really hard to get attention.
It is, but what's interesting about YouTube is it's a completely different beast from Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or, TikTok or any of those. At least on those other ones, at least on Instagram, you can leave comments on other people's photos, or you can reach out to them, DM them. On YouTube, it's basically you throw it out there and you hope that algorithm picks it up, shows it to people who might be watching similar types of videos. But what's interesting is, and you probably had this, you'll put out a video that you think, man, this is okay. This is just an all right video. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh my God, like what? Where'd all these views come from? How can I do this again?
Yeah.
And that's where the magic happens on YouTube.
Yeah. I love it, man. And I love what YouTube is all about. In fact, I did a podcast yesterday and we were talking about how YouTube is literally like a free online university. You want to learn something, go to YouTube.
Yeah, and that's completely changed. Like, think of just 10, 15 years ago when you wanted to learn something, you went and got a book about it, or you called your friend who was knowledgeable about it. Now, like, anything is a YouTube tutorial away. Anything.
Yeah.
From like learning how to configure your hard drive or something to like learning how to like put shingles on your roof. Like, you can learn anything on YouTube now.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And, Chris, I know you said you started the YouTube channel back in 2011. And I definitely want to dive into that and the whole thought process behind that. But I know that YouTube isn't the only thing that you do. You also are in broadcast media, right? And, you're wearing a bunch of different hats. So for the listeners out there that aren't familiar with your work, would you mind to just give us like a brief introduction?
Yeah, so my background is in broadcasting. I've been a TV host and radio personality since I graduated from college. So that was 2005. I've been doing this now for 15 years. And it was always just my dream. I was always so passionate. And I was always drawn in by some of the great people that I watched on TV or heard on the radio growing up. And my mom still has a cassette tape from a Fisher-Price radio that I had when I was like 4 years old of me pretending to be a radio broadcaster. And that was something that I just always was passionate about and always wanted to do. And I think growing up, I looked at that as like, that's a long shot. There's not a lot of people that are on TV. There's not a lot of people that get to live that dream of being a broadcaster. But I kind of just realized that in high school, I had this communication studies class where we made a TV segment every single week. And I loved it. When it came time to pick a college major and go off to college, I thought, well, that communication studies class was really fun. I'll just study communications in college as well. And I realized in college that like the courses I was taking weren't exactly preparing me to like dive right into the world of television or get behind a mic on the radio. And I had this epiphany in my senior year of college. And I was having such a great time in college. I had the best friends there, and we, as you know, have lots of fun, drink lots of beers. That's what a lot of your college experience is about. And I had this one day where I woke up in my senior year, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I had this epiphany that when I graduated at the end of this year, all that was going to be done. I was going to have to work for the next 40 to 50 years of my life, and I didn't want to have to wake up on Monday morning and hate going to work like so many people do. And I made a decision in that moment that I was going to at least try, at least make an effort to have a job that I didn't hate. That was the bare minimum, a job that I didn't hate. And I started applying for volunteer positions, internships, and just doing anything I could to kind of dip my toe into the quote unquote real world of broadcasting. And one radio station brought me on as like a guy who handed stuff out at events. One TV station was actually run by volunteers and let people like run the cameras, be the floor director, be the audio guy. And this other radio station said, hey, we don't take on volunteers. It's like against our like insurance policy, but how would you like a job? And I said, oh my God, sure. They said, well, it only pays $8 an hour. I'm like, well, that's $8 more than I thought I was going to make. And that's kind of where it all began. So, born and raised just outside of Toronto. And I've been so fortunate that ever since I graduated college to work on TV and, continue to live that passion and chase after that passion and not hate my job every day, which I think is such an important part of this.
Yeah. Wow. I think it's so cool when I talk to people that knew what they wanted to do from childhood. Like I personally can't relate to that. I wish I could, honestly, because I lack that one thing that I'm so passionate about that I'm dead set on doing. And I think that's just super admirable that you've wanted to do something your entire life and you actually did it. And you recognize that you didn't want to do something you hated, after university. And it's just super admirable, man. A lot of people out there right now are stuck doing things that they hate. And I'm the biggest preacher. Life is just too short to not enjoy what you do every day.
Yeah. And I think that there's a strange thing that happens. Like obviously it's exciting when you graduate from college, you get that first job offer and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to make $40,000 a year. I've never made that much money in my life. I'm 22 years old. There's something exciting about feeling like accepted. A company wants you out of all the people that they can possibly have, and they're willing to pay you tens of thousands of dollars to do that. But then I think that there's like this trade-off that happens as you start to get older. And I'm saying it is important to take a job after you graduate. But I think there's this weird trade-off that happens where you're told to not dream bigger as you get older. And I think that as people get into their late 20s and into their 30s, they start dreaming smaller and they start dreaming safer instead of those, big dreams that they might have had, when they were in high school or college or in their 20s. And I think it's important to realize that these things are possible. And I think that too many people don't look into the possibility of what could happen and just go, oh, well, that guy or that girl's doing it because they have fill in the blank. And it's not true. Anyone can do this. I think just a lot of people don't take that time to bet on themselves.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. And I think it's really interesting. You said that you were willing to do volunteer work, right? You were willing to pretty much work to learn, not to earn, because you wanted to get that foot in the door. How important do you think that aspect was for your success now?
Oh, the most important, like absolutely. And I think that if I didn't have that volunteer stuff on my resume, I wouldn't even be considered for any of the jobs that I ended up getting. And I think that too many people go, well, I put in my time in college. I'm ready to go. I passed all the courses. Now I'm ready to go. Give me a job. And my whole thing with my epiphany in my senior year of college was I wanted to stack my resume so much that when I graduated, a potential employer would go, my God, you just graduated and you've already, worked or volunteered there. Wow, that's amazing. Like, of course we'll bring you in for an entry-level job. And as you know, with the industry that you work in, it's all about who you know. And it's about how you're able to work those connections. And it's not about doing it in a sleazy or cheesy way. It's just about adding value. How can I help you, which, as you know, in return, will then come back and help you, help me.
That's a golden nugget right there. So I'm working on getting a gong. I think I say this every episode, but I'm about to start smashing the gong when somebody drops a golden nugget. That is spot on, Chris. How can I add value to you, especially when you're first starting out, right? Too many people get started with the what can people give me mentality, like I want to take. But many times you're talking about people that are far, down the line than you are and have done a lot more things than you are. It's like, why would that person just give you value? You need to be asking how you can provide value to them.
And for someone like that, they know what they can give. If you're asking of this person's time, which is the most important, valuable thing that they have, they know what they can give. What can they get in exchange? And I think that too many people frame this the reverse way. They're basically saying, hey, I have a podcast, YouTube channel, Instagram page, or I want to do X, Y, and Z. Here's what you can give me. But I think it should be framed the complete opposite way.
So it's more so, like, what would you recommend, like an actual item for somebody that, let's say, a podcaster, for me, for example,
sure.
How should I approach guests that are, 100 times where I'm at right now?
Well, I think that you're already doing a great job of this. And I think that what will end up happening for you, and we'll use you as an example, Ross, because you're doing such a great job in your podcast, is I think that you go, here's my podcast. It's I've had this guest on who has done this. I've had this guest on and their credentials are this. I think that when you can basically start to list off, like, these people have trusted me with their time, I think that you can also trust me with yours as well. And I think the biggest thing about YouTube is you need to have a realization that nobody is watching your videos because of who you are. They're watching your videos because of who they are. And I think it's important that the you in YouTube is not the person on the screen. The you in YouTube is the person that you are making the video for, the person who's watching the video.
Boom. I'm loving this. Chris, you're bringing the heat. You're bringing the heat, brother. I love it. Yeah, credibility, right? Credibility is so important. And earlier you mentioned it's about who you know. And I completely agree with that. When you know the right people and you're in the right circle, things start to happen, right? Would you agree?
Well, it's also that, I think too many people think a connection needs to lead to something immediately. But how many times in your life have you been introduced to somebody, or you've had a LinkedIn connection with them or an Instagram connection with them, and 18 months down the road, 2 years down the road, something finally ties in and it makes sense for you guys to connect? And it's like, that's the stuff. You can never know too many people, I think.
Oh, I love it, man. So, Chris, let's talk about that first job, right? You're out of college, you're doing volunteer work, and you learned your first paying gig, right? Walk us through that process. I know you were super excited, right? $8 more than you had. It's a huge deal to you at the time. And, walk us through that. Like, what kind of hats were you wearing in that position?
So for that job, I was still in college when that was happening. And that was my last basically 6 months of college. I was a board operator at a radio show. And it's like the most thankless job you could possibly have. You're the guy who sits in front of the large audio board and you're potting up the host when he's talking, or you're bringing in the music bed underneath. You're calling guests and connecting them to the board. So that was all the stuff that I was doing there. But my first real job, on the air, it's such an interesting story how I got this. So I reached out to every TV and radio station within probably 100-mile radius of both my college town and the city where I grew up. And I reached out to them and said, hey, I'm looking for an internship. And 2 of them got back to me. One of them was actually in Toronto. So, that's a huge station in a huge city. And they basically said, look, you're probably going to be making photocopies, making phone calls, and maybe every once in a while you'll shadow one of our reporters. And I went, oh, that sounds pretty good. And then the guy who I did the interview with said, well, what do you actually want to do? And I said, well, I want to be on TV. He goes, well, I don't know if this is the best internship for you then. So there was this this TV station that was 60 miles from my hometown. And I sent an email to the director of that TV station. And I just completely randomly found this. I Googled it and I sent him an email and said, hey, I'm on spring break next week. I'm going to be in your town. I would love to come by and talk to you about an internship. This was a complete lie. I had no intention of going to this town. I hadn't been to this town in 15 years, but I just put it out there that, hey, I'm going to be here. It's up to you now to say no. And he said, well, if you're going to be in town, sure, come on by. And I came on by and he said, look, I'm going to be honest with you. We usually don't take on interns unless it's affiliated with a college program, but your resume looks pretty good. You've been putting in some work here. So you know what, man, I'm going to take a chance on you. And it was just like that. It was because I built up the resume, because I completely lied and said I was going to be there. That's when I got this internship. And I was driving 60 miles each way, about an hour each way, living at my parents' house, working my old high school job at a pet store in the fish department, scooping dead fish and getting goldfish for people, just so I could pay for the gas to drive to my internship. And after 2 months of doing that, every single day at this internship was me being on TV or following a reporter actually doing the work, which is exactly what that person in the Toronto station said I wouldn't be doing in Toronto. So it worked out so perfectly. But after 2 months of doing this, my paycheck was getting pretty thin there. And I went to talk to that same general manager to say, thank you for the opportunity, but I can't keep doing this anymore. And he goes, oh, I'm glad you came up here. I was meaning to talk to you. We love the work you've been doing as an intern, and we want to hire you on. So you're right. You are done as an intern, and next Friday is your first day. And just like that, my internship turned into a job.
No way. That's incredible. I want to back up here. So you said you were driving 60 miles to go to this internship and then 60 miles back.
Yeah. So 60 miles there, 60 miles back. For my Canadian friends, that's 100 kilometers.
Yeah.
And when I ended up getting the job, this was happening in the winter too. So this was happening the Canadian, some days, if it really snowed badly, that drive would take 2.5 hours.
Wow. That's dedication. And that's really what it takes, right? And I love to talk about this because there's somebody listening right now that hasn't gotten started yet. They haven't even, put their foot in the door. It's just a thought right now in their head. And many times that person isn't fully aware of what it really takes to win in life or, to achieve results and achieve success. Like, you got to put in the work. You have to put in the work. And sometimes it's not unicorns and rainbows, right? It's not fun. I'm sure you can joke about it now, but at the time, I'm sure 120 miles a day, I mean, that takes a toll on you, right? It's rough at the time.
Oh yeah, and like when you're working in a small town like that, your stories aren't exactly exciting. So I was a news reporter, but when you're in a small market like that, you're also shooting the stories, writing the stories, editing the stories, setting up the stories, and you're on camera reporting on the stories too. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and your stories aren't exactly the most interesting things. Like I had a story one time that I was pitched where it was a cat was in this retirement home and it made people feel better. And I'm like, that doesn't really seem like a story to me. I remember doing a story of like, here's a new stop sign in this town. Like those were actual stories that I reported on.
Oh my goodness.
But I think the moral of this is I think too many people kind of sit back and are waiting for things to happen. And that's not going to happen. Opportunity is not just going to come knock on your door and you open it and go, oh, hey there, opportunity. It's nice to see you. You have to go out and not just knock on doors, because most of those doors won't actually be created. You have to go out and build these doors and then knock on these doors. And then when no one answers that door, go build another damn door.
Boom. You're absolutely right, Chris. I couldn't agree more. I can relate to you a little bit, but when I was, I think, 17 or so, I wanted my first car so bad. Like I was determined, hey, once I get the driver's license, I'm going to have my car same day. So I took a job, minimum wage. I don't even remember what it was at the time. And I would have to I was in high school at the time. I would have to take the school bus, which was not the one that took me home, but somebody else's bus. I would get on that bus somehow and I would take it 15 minutes away. And then I would have to get off and take the public bus another 15 minutes away and then walk a mile because the bus stop wasn't in front of the place I was working at, just so I could work, earn a paycheck, save it up, and then buy my first car. You know what, Chris? I bought that car. It was $900 and it was the best thing, man, I could do at the time. I was determined, right? When you put determination in the mix, you're going to get it done. You're going to get it done.
And I think there's another element to that story. There's something about when you get your first car, there's like this sense of freedom that you get.
100%.
Like, I don't have to rely on my anymore, my parents to drive me anymore. I can get in my car and drive wherever I want, whenever I want to do it.
Yeah, right? Just drive as much as possible. Nowadays, not so much, as you get older, but definitely when you're getting the first car. So, Chris, if that internship didn't lead to a position, right, what would you have done? If they were like, oh, well, okay, sorry to hear that you don't want to be here anymore. Sayonara, see you later.
Well, my plan was to build up a demo tape or a resume tape, as they call it in the industry, where it's basically a 3-minute compilation of like some of your best work. So I was hoping to at least leave there with this demo reel that I could then present to other places. My plan, actually, I wasn't planning to get this job. I wasn't planning for the internship to turn into a job. I had actually already applied for graduate school. I was going to get my master's of journalism at this incredible journalism school in Canada called Ryerson University. And I got accepted, which was a huge thing in itself to just be accepted to this journalism school. They only accepted like 30 people for this program. So I was continuing on with this internship that turned into a job. And then the plan was in September, I would take journalism school and do that. And I got into journalism, started taking the classes in journalism school. And I was, on my first day, we had a writing assignment where we're all at our computers and he gave us an hour. The professor gave us an hour to like write out this thing. And I wrote my thing in like 10 minutes. And I spent the rest of the class Googling how I could drop out of school and still get my money back. And that was on a Tuesday. And I learned that the deadline to drop out and get my money back was that Friday. So I'm like, well, I'll go to a few more classes and see how this goes. And I realized I was learning so much more in the real world than I was learning in school. And I was going to save myself tens of thousands of dollars in tuition by dropping out and then going and making money in the real world. So I went home that night, called my boss at the TV station and said, I'm thinking of dropping out of school. Is my job still waiting for me? And he said, of course, your job's still here, but I don't want to be the person who tells you to drop out of school. And I said, no, I'm dropping out. This is not for me. I'm learning way more in the real world. So yeah, I'm going to drop out tomorrow. And if it's okay, can I come in on Monday? And they said, yep, sounds good. So that was actually my plan. And I'm actually glad I went through with going to graduate school, seeing it wasn't for me, and then going back and learning more in the real world.
So you had certainty. You had certainty that was not for you at the time, and you were ready to make that decision to discontinue going to school.
Yeah, it was the best decision I think I ever made. And it's funny that talking about dropping out of postgraduate school is the best decision I ever made, but it put me 2 years ahead of everyone I was in that program with. And that job at that small station where the internship turned into a job actually was able to let me build up my resume tape enough that I got my first real break after that, hosting a show for MTV2 Canada, which was now nationally seen all across the country. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was still in school. I had already moved to this job and had already been hosting it for a year before I would have even graduated from school. So it's it all kind of played out perfectly for me.
I'm seeing more and more in that of that in 2019, 2020. A lot of companies are not so much concerned with degrees as they are, your real world ability to do something. Right. For example, in the software space, I mean, and I'm not knocking school at all, but if you take a look at companies like Google and Facebook and Yahoo and, all the big tech companies, I mean, they're hiring people that are even self-taught sometimes because they're finding, hey, if you can do this and you get the job done, well, we're not so much worried about, all the fancy paperwork. We just want somebody that's, going to get the job done.
I think that all a college really shows is that you're able to stick with something. A college degree is that you can stick with something for 4 years. And I think that 10 or 15 or 20 plus years ago, I think that was an important thing for employers to see. They could go, oh, he went to a certain place. Now I think it's just basically oh, you went to this school? Ah, one of my buddies went to that school. And I think that that's really it. But if I'm an employer and someone applies and they have 500,000 YouTube subscribers or a big following on Instagram and I'm a marketing company, you're going to get the job over someone who hasn't built that up but has a great resume. You now have the degree of the College of Real Life.
I got to say, I am envious of people that did go to school for 4 years. I personally dropped out myself from community college, so I never got the real college experience, making friends for life, I never got that. So it's kind of like a Debbie Downer for me. I wish I could go back in time, but just like you, I was certain. I knew that I wanted to pursue, the entrepreneurial path. But there's definitely aspects of university that I agree with, like discipline, as you said. Number one, discipline, right? Can you actually stick with something for 4 years, maintain that grade point average, and actually succeed and graduate? I think that's important,
Well, the other real, discipline thing is you have to decide for the first time in your life, you're the one who's in control of whether you're going to class or what time you're going to bed or all those things. I remember my parents dropped me off at my dorm and then kind of hugged me and kissed me goodbye. And I was I looked around and I'm like, wait a second, I'm in charge now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And that was what was actually a really difficult transition because it's so easy to stay up till 1, 2, 3, 4 in the morning every single night and drink with your buddies and have a great time. But then you have to decide, am I going to go to class at 8, 9, 10, whatever? Well, 8's very early. So that'd be a stupid decision to make an 8 o'clock class in your schedule. But that's like a big part of like growing up, if you will, is making those decisions when you're in college.
Right. And especially in the entrepreneurial world, it's extremely tough for new entrepreneurs to create schedules for themselves, right? When you're your own boss and, you know, you're going out there, whether it's a YouTube channel or a real estate business or you're making a software, there's nobody really to tell you what to do and when to do it. And especially with all the distractions we have nowadays, it's easy to just get lost and waste time. So, like, how do you, Chris, how do you stick to a schedule? Like, what's the average day like for you? And not in this quarantine situation, of course. Sure. How do you how do you stay grounded, you know?
We're living in a weird time right now, right? Well, I think that anyone who's entrepreneurial minded, you're right. It's tough to stick to a schedule, but it doesn't matter if you stick to a schedule of like, you know, your 9 to 5 friends or your 10 to 6 friends or whatever. You know, I think it's just important to get stuff done. And I think that that's the biggest thing for me. I start every single day and I write down everything I'm doing that day. I call it a get to do list. These are the things that I get to do today. And I'll write down like literally everything, like from the big things I'm doing with the business I'm working with or my YouTube channel or podcast to the little things like don't forget to like do your laundry or empty the dishwasher. And let me tell you how gratifying it is at the end of the day to look at a list with 17 things crossed off. And it's also like a kind of like a promise that you have to yourself. Like at the start of the day, you're physically writing these things down and making an agreement with yourself. I am going to do these things today. And at the end of the day, you can look at it and go, man, look at all the stuff that I've accomplished. So I think that that's a really big thing for me. The other thing that really, you know, I'm not a big coffee drinker. I actually don't drink coffee at all. So the gym is what energizes me. So that's how I start my days. Basically, I get up, get to the gym, and then I can start my day after that, like energized with the energy that I get from the gym.
I love that framework, Chris, the get to do list, right? Not the to do stuff that we don't want to do and we don't want to look at and we want to hide from and ignore, but it's gratitude, right? You get to do those things for that day.
Yeah, and I think that too many people look at a to-do list as these are the things I have to do, or, you know, we've all heard the honey-do list that someone gets from their husband or wife. And it's like, no, these are the things that I get to do today because I'm in the position that I'm in right now. And, you know, if we circle this back to YouTube or a podcast, I think that the audience starts to really inspire you. You know, you put your stuff out there and you start to get those comments as you're building your channel up and you go, oh man, well, I got to put another video out because that last one, you know, really affected this person's life, or this person's life, or that other person commented that I should do a video like this. And you start to have that like one-to-one, like person-to-person connection with your audience, which I think is such a cool thing about the world we live in right now.
Yeah, definitely, you know, things really get exciting when you're building that forward momentum. I feel like it creates a purpose, right? You have a purpose to create each day or, you know, do that one thing that impacts others each day. And it seems like that's what you're, you know, really into with your content, is just impacting people and feeding off of other people's energy and how they react to your content.
The thing that I really realized kind of early on with my YouTube channel is double down, triple down on the things that you're good at, and double down and triple down on the things that everyone seems to be responding to. And I think that a lot of people, when they're starting out a YouTube channel, they just kind of throw spaghetti at a wall, which I think is smart. But then you start to see which pieces, which noodles of that spaghetti stick to the wall. And if the videos that are, I'm just going to make something up here, if your videos about your working out or your videos about your daily routine are doing better than your other videos, well, I think the audience is trying to tell you something.
So double down on the content that's getting you the results.
Yeah, maybe it's not the content that you enjoy making the most, but if those videos are getting 2 or 3 or 4 times more views or more, I think the audience is trying to tell you something.
Great advice. Great advice. So, Chris, you were doing the MTV stuff. I want to kind of backtrack here.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
You got an MTV gig. It's national. I mean, that's huge, right? You're a few. How long actually was the timeline from that $8 an hour gig to the MTV gig?
So I was at the first TV station for 18 months, and I was basically faking a demo reel, because when you're a news reporter, your stuff is news. And when you're applying for like an MTV type of job, that's a very different style of thing. So I would go out after my shift, set the camera up and like fake stuff so that I at least had a reel that looked like I was doing that kind of stuff. So 18 months at the driving 60 miles a day job, or 60 miles each way job. And then I got this job in Vancouver, which is on the complete other side of the country, hosting this show for MTV2. And much like how I got the internship at that small station, I kind of got this job in the same way. I found out the person who was doing the hiring, and I submitted my stuff to them, didn't hear anything back, but I just thought to myself, I think I have the resume to like at least be considered for this job. So I sent my stuff out to them, didn't hear anything back. And then one day I said, you know what? I'm going to call up that TV station and try to get on the phone with the person who's doing the hiring. So I called the front desk of this TV station, City TV, this huge, massive TV station in Vancouver, this massive city. And I said, oh, hi there. Is so-and-so there, please? And they said, one moment, please. And I'm like, oh, I can't believe this is going to work. And the person doing the hiring picked up the phone, and I introduced myself, said, hey, I sent my stuff into you. And they said, oh, we haven't really looked at it yet, but, we'll be in touch with you. And I thought, oh, well, that kind of sucks. They actually ended up sending me an email a few days later and said, we're starting to look at stuff. Just wanted to let you know that, we're going to look at your thing. In the email signature was her direct phone number. And I thought, well, I'm going to wait like 3 days and I'm going to call her at her desk. And sure enough, I called her at her desk. She answered the phone and I said, hey, I'm hoping you've had a chance to look at it. I'm actually going to be in Vancouver next week. Total lie again. It's a 5-hour flight. I said, I'm going to be there next Thursday. I'd just love to come in and talk to you about the job. And they said, oh, well, if you're going to be here, we'd love to bring you in for an audition. And boom, just like that, I talked myself into this audition, got this meeting with them, and 5 minutes into the meeting, they offered me the job.
No way, dude. That's so inspiring. I love that framework, right? It's like you just speak it into his existence, right? Like,
well, I think the biggest thing is I think that if you don't ask, the answer's always no. So I figured if I could put it out there and go, hey, I'm going to be basically in your backyard. Can you spare a few minutes to see me? And they go, actually, we're considering someone else, or, we don't have time for you. I could just go, oh, well, thank you anyway. That would be the worst possible answer.
Right.
But I just figured I'd throw it out there. And if it could possibly happen, might as well ask.
You got to be proactive, right? You got to go after the things that you want. So, Chris, you get the MTV job, man. That's huge. How are you feeling at the time, right? Like, what kind of thoughts are going through your head when they offer you this job?
Oh, I'm jacked up. Like, to go from like reporting on stop signs in a small town to now I'm on MTV2 Canada. My first assignment was to shadow. Remember the rapper Chingy?
Of course, yeah.
He had the song Right There.
Yeah.
My first assignment, second day of work, was to shadow him. And I'm like, I just went from like reporting on these stories that I feel like nobody cared about to now I'm like spending a day with one of the hottest rappers at the time. And what was so cool about it is I actually felt like it just felt normal. It just felt like I belonged in that space. So, man, I was riding cloud nine. Like my job there was basically playing and reviewing video games, interviewing celebrities, and like watching movies. It was like the greatest, coolest job. And I was so grateful to be able to do that.
How did your friends and family react to that? You working at MTV?
Well, I think that they just thought that this was the next logical step. At the time, I was 23 years old, and this is something that I wanted. I kept putting that out there, that this is a job that I wanted. And I knew that my first reporting job was just going to help build my resume so I could get something else. So when I finally landed that, I think that everyone was happy, but also going, yeah, of course you got this job. This is that thing you've always talked about getting.
Awesome. So from MTV, what happened? Because obviously you're not with MTV anymore. So what was the next step after that?
That's an actually really interesting part of this story. I thought I was going to be at this MTV show. Like I said, I started when I was 23. I thought I'd be there for like 5 or 10 years. And a year into me hosting this show, one big media conglomerate bought this other big media conglomerate, merged them together, and needed to like cut a whole bunch of stuff and save some money. And our show ended up getting canceled after being on the air for like 14 seasons. So it was like so heartbreaking that basically the carpet got pulled out from underneath. I was hosting the show and things were going so well. I'm only a year into this, and out of nowhere, boom, literally just like that. We were making the show one day, we were writing it and getting ready to do it. And our boss said, "Stop what you're doing, everyone. The show is canceled."
Wow.
So I actually had to kind of restart, figure things out again. And I had to pack my 1995 Robin's Egg Blue Toyota Corolla back up and drive 47 hours back across the country and move back in with my parents. And it was such a humbling experience to go, here I was last week on a show that was nationally available in Canada to now not even having a job. And I was unemployed actually for 7 months during that time. And I would audition for shows and I would get down to like me and one other person, me and 2 other people, and then I wouldn't get the job. And that was actually what inspired me to start looking in the US. And I started looking for an agent in the US. I figured if I can't get a job in my own country with the resume that I've built up right now, like I got to look somewhere else. And that's when I ended up getting an agent in the US. And it ended up leading me to getting a job in Cleveland where I was an entertainment reporter for the CBS station there.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be gut-wrenching, right? I mean, everything is going great. You got the dream gig. You're loving it. And then one day, snap of the finger, it's all gone. It's got to be super tough to handle that and be able to push through that. And I know that there's so many people listening right now that are going through something similar, or they've gone through something similar. Maybe they're, it's coming in the future and they don't even know it yet. So what advice would you give somebody to get through a tough moment like that, where everything, like the whole world just flips upside down and now you're feeling all these types of emotions of like anxiety, depression, you're freaking out. What advice would you offer that person?
It was a real crossroads for me, if I'm being honest, Ross, because like this is the thing I dreamed about my whole life, and I feel like it had been taken away from me. I was very grateful to be able to live with my parents as I kind of like got back up on my feet. But the thing that I did during that time is I never lost sight of the thing that I wanted, was to be on TV. And it would have been so easy to go, well, I tried it. I did it for a few years. It was fun. Now it's on to the next thing. But in that moment, I realized that like I was going to take a stand and I wasn't going to settle for anything less than being back on TV. So I think that if someone finds himself in this situation, it's important to set a goal for yourself. And the phrase that's completely changed my life is vague goals get vague results. And the flip side of that is specific goals get specific results. And I think that too many people in that type of position would go, well, I want to get another job. And my specific thing was I want to get hired on TV and still be doing the same thing that I was doing. I wanted to be an entertainment reporter. And that was what ended up happening. I set that out there, and I wasn't willing to accept anything less than that.
Do you feel winners win regardless?
Well, I think that it just happens because that's the mentality that they have. And I think that winners have the mentality of you're either winning or you're learning. It's not winning or losing. And I think that people often will go, well, I wanted this thing, but this thing came along, and I mean, the benefits are good and you get like 3 weeks vacation. So, and I think that often sometimes people just take this thing and then they end up being 60 years old going, I wonder what could have happened if I tried a little bit harder, pursued it a little bit more when I was in my 20s and 30s.
Right. Yeah. You can't throw out the towel. Like you got to keep going. I completely agree. And for all the listeners out there, if you're going through a tough moment right now, I promise you, right? Think and Grow Rich. You're always 3 feet from goal. Don't quit. Don't stop. Keep pushing. It's so important because, Chris, if you would have just threw in that towel, you wouldn't be where you are today, right? You might have went off in a different path and who knows, maybe serving at Applebee's or who knows what you would have been doing, right? So
they do have great boneless wings at Applebee's.
So you take a gig in Cleveland, and being an entertainment reporter, right? With you said CBS.
Right. Yeah.
And what did it look like? You did that for a little bit, and I know eventually you actually went down to Miami and did some stuff down there. So what did that look like? What did that transition look like?
Like, if I'm being honest, obviously Cleveland wasn't part of the plan, but when you are from a different country, I was from Canada, it's very hard to get the ability to work in the U.S. And I had auditioned to host TRL before TRL went off the air. And I had auditioned for E! and Entertainment Tonight, and I had meetings with Access Hollywood and other MTV shows. And then this Cleveland station came around and said, we'd like to hire you and we'll sponsor your visa. And it's like, oh, wow. Well, that's a ticket to now be able to work in the U.S. And this job was so much better than I could have ever possibly imagined. On my third day of work, I flew to Los Angeles and covered the Oscars. I was on the Oscars red carpet covering the Oscars, and it's just, it was amazing. And from there, I covered the Grammys and I won a few Emmys, and it was the most amazing job. And I basically, through that job, was able to interview like every celebrity in the world and hear their story and have it impact my life and help my story out. So it's 5 years in Cleveland as an entertainment reporter, then 5 years in Miami as an entertainment reporter for a show there called Deco Drive. And man, I've just been so fortunate to be able to travel the world, interview some of the most interesting people and biggest celebrities, and hopefully take a little piece of their story and, apply that to my puzzle.
So 2 things there. Number one, TRL. So I'm from New York City, like the suburbs of New York City. At least.
Yeah.
I used to get out of school and drive down to stand outside. I was the guy standing outside of TRL when they would wave out of the window. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I probably shouldn't have admitted to that, but it was like the coolest thing.
I love it.
Yeah.
You're probably there for NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys.
I don't know if it was that time, but it was like the coolest thing in the world. TRL was like the hottest show in the world at one point. Yeah. It was so fun. And the second thing is, my question is, who was your favorite celebrity interview that you've ever done?
So number one on the list for the longest time, the person I wanted to interview more than anybody was The Rock. And I was such a big wrestling fan growing up, and I loved The Rock's charisma, and I loved his passion for everything that he did. And I was able to interview him, he's doing a lot of movie interviews, but I was actually able to interview him for the first time backstage at Monday Night Raw, which was even cooler. As a wrestling fan, I got to interview The Rock as The Rock, like in the wrestling atmosphere. Now I've interviewed The Rock 9 times. Not that I'm counting or anything, but no, it's
9 times interviewing great. The Rock. That's incredible. I love The Rock, man. I think he's so inspirational, and the dude just has a vibe. He's like a one-of-a-kind guy, you don't see people like that every day.
And it's hard to find anyone who doesn't like The Rock.
Yeah.
And The Rock's everything you want him to be. He's funny and he's charismatic, and he has this really interesting way of making you feel special. Even though he's the biggest movie star in the world, he goes out of his way to make you feel special in those moments. And I just feel like I learned a lot from that. So yeah, Rock was number one on the list, and I think always will be.
That's awesome. So you're going from this internship, now you're at the Grammys, you're winning Emmys. At this point, Chris, did you feel like you made it?
No, and I still don't feel that way. Like, I still feel like there's so much more ground that I want to cover. And I want to take as many opportunities as I can. And I'm planning to move out to Los Angeles so I can be even closer to these auditions, or, I want to host a bigger show. And it's interesting that I can now have the backing of a YouTube channel behind me. it's so wild how backwards this thing works now. It used to be like, if you were broadcasting, it was like, well, what other shows have you hosted? Now it's like, oh, what have you built for yourself on social media and YouTube? Oh, cool. We can use that to help leverage this show that you're going to be a part of.
Right.
And it's so cool that the two are now kind of working with each other, when it used to be broadcasting was in this lane. It was on television, and YouTube is in this lane, and it's on your phone and your computer.
Right. So the reason I asked that question, Chris, is because a lot of times when people get a little bit of success, right, they get the taste of it, they make their first dollar doing whatever it is that they want to do, and they feel like they made it, right? Like, I actually did this. Okay, I don't have to go full steam ahead anymore. I can take my foot off the gas a little bit, right? I can become comfortable. I'm complacent. And that actually doesn't always work out in their favor. In fact, sometimes they just go the complete direction which they came from. So what would you tell that person that gets a little bit of results, they get that taste of success, and they think, hey, well, I'm here now, so I can be a little more relaxed?
Well, I don't think that anyone who's truly successful has that mindset. I think that, that's like climbing to the peak of the mountain and then going, oh, the actual peak's, way up there. And I understand that with everything I've done in my career, I've only accomplished just tiny little bit. And I look at, everyone else who's in this industry and everything that they've accomplished. And I think it just means that there's more ground to cover and there's more to, be done out there. And I think that you should never be looking back at the things that you've accomplished and patting yourself on the back. I think that if you're looking back, that's where you're headed. And I think that you got to be looking forward at the possibilities that are to come.
Great advice, Chris. I want to talk about the YouTube channel, right?
Sure.
YouTube channel, you figured it. You figured out the game, right? You're creating great content. You have great numbers. You have a great community. What was the inspiration behind creating a YouTube channel and getting started on the digital platforms as opposed to the, traditional media that you were doing?
Yeah, if I'm being honest, Ross, it kind of happened by accident. So I would do these interviews, and then they'd be 10, 15, 20-minute interviews, and then we'd only air 30-ish seconds on TV. And I thought, well, I thought that was a pretty good interview, and I liked the questions that I was asking. I think a fellow fan would appreciate, these questions in this interview too. So I started just putting these interviews up on YouTube as like the raw version of these interviews, just so they would live somewhere and not just be lost on the cutting room floor. And that's kind of how it began. And then I realized that these wrestling interviews started to gain a little bit of traction. I would talk to these wrestlers that I would interview for the news station I was working for, and then ask them questions that I genuinely cared about as a fan. And I'd put them up on YouTube, and other fans would key in on these or watch these interviews, and the numbers started to grow. I remember this one interview. I went to sleep. I don't know, I had like 34 subscribers at the time, and one of them was my mom. And I woke up the next day and I had 6,000 views in this video. I'm like, oh my God, 6,000 views. Like, what happened here?
Yeah.
Then I woke up the next day and had 36,000 views. And what had happened was it was being reposted on Reddit and some wrestling websites. And I got other people watching this video that didn't even know I existed. So that was kind of the genesis of this. And it was just this slow process of like me going, and I like it, I'll put it online. And I did that 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year. And it was like almost 3 years ago now that I really started to make that specific goal of like, instead of just doing this when it was convenient, maybe I would drive an hour or 2 or 3 to make an interview happen. Or maybe if I was in town for one thing and someone lived here, I would do an interview with them for my YouTube channel. And I made it a goal that year to do 40 wrestling interviews, 40 interviews for my YouTube channel, when the previous year I'd done like 18. So I ended up doing 50 that year. The next year my goal was to do 50, and I ended up doing 100. And it was by setting those specific goals and actually having something that I could chase after and attain, I think is what really helped my channel kind of get the momentum that it got.
Yeah. I could only imagine waking up to see 60,000 views on a video. The YouTube algorithm does its thing and something clicks, you put out one piece of content and, it performs well. Because as a creator, and I know you agree with this, it feels feels good to get recognition for your work, right? Like,
yeah, of course it does. And look, I think at the root of my story here is if I can make a channel interviewing wrestlers and have, the subscribers that I have, you who's listening or watching this can make a channel about whatever it is that you're passionate about, because the internet allows us to niche down into the craziest niches that we have. While I come from the world of broadcasting, YouTube is the exact opposite. It's niche casting. You can dial into having a channel about, liking peanut butter or something and have millions of views.
Especially with TikTok. I mean, you can get on TikTok and like lick a bottle and get 5 million views on that.
That's what I'm talking
unbelievable. Chris, what would you say the toughest part about being a YouTube content creator is?
I think it's coming up with new content all the time. And I think that that's a big struggle that a lot of YouTubers have, because, you're only as good as your last upload, even though you'll have uploads that will consistently do well for, years to come sometimes. But I think you're only as good as your last upload. So it's constantly trying to create new and interesting stuff. But I think the biggest challenge, and we kind of touched on this earlier, is always putting the audience first. A video that might be interesting to you might not appeal to the masses. But then again, I think it's worth throwing it out there and seeing what happens. But the biggest thing people need to remember is to always make the videos for the audience. It's them too, And when it comes to like equipment, right? A lot of people, I know myself included, get discouraged if we don't have all the fancy equipment, the $1,000 camera, the $1,000 microphone. Do you think that equipment should stop somebody from getting started from the lack of the right equipment? No, it's 2020. We're all walking around with video cameras and audio recorders in our pocket. And I think that too many people go, well, I would be a YouTuber, but I don't have the Canon EOS camera or something, or I don't have these microphones to start a podcast with. And I think that the thing that's most important is you got to just start. You got to start somewhere.
Ooh.
Look at where Joe Rogan is at right now. And, and I know this is the name of your podcast. You got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Look at Joe Rogan's podcast. Nobody's talking about what his episode 7 was like, or episode 77, or for that matter, episode 207. And if you go back and watch it, it's pretty bad. But I think what's important is just taking those steps. You got to get started. And your first episode, your first video will turn into your second one, which will turn into your 7th one, which will turn into your 70th one. And I think that the equipment should not matter at all. It's a matter of just getting stuff out there. I still record all my interviews on my iPhone.
Yeah, which is great quality, by the way. The iPhone, the camera is great. A lot of people knock it, but I totally agree with you. I mean, you don't need the $700 camera right away. I mean, the phone's perfectly capable of shooting content.
Absolutely. And I think that, like I said, we all have a video camera in our pocket. If this is something you're thinking of doing, like nothing should be stopping you at all. The only thing that's really stopping you isn't the equipment that you have. It's you and your own self-doubt.
You just got to do it, right? You just got to get started, put it out there, and just keep at it, right? And don't quit.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm curious. I want to switch gears up here a little bit. If you were to start all over, right, going back to university when you were doing that internship, right, is there anything that you would do differently knowing what you know now?
Well, am I doing it now in a 2020 world, or am I going back to when I was in college back then?
Back then.
I think the bigger thing I would do is just try to get even more stuff under my belt. And I think that while I did a lot of stuff in my senior year after I had that epiphany that I didn't want to hate my job, I think that I would have just done more. And the crazy thing about my college story is I actually auditioned to be part of our campus radio station. And I didn't even get past the first round of auditions. And it's just so ironic that, now I'm a broadcaster for a job and I couldn't even be a broadcaster for free at my college radio station. But I kind of took that as like, oh, I'm not good enough or they don't want me. And I never tried, applying again. And I think that I would have just chased after those things and really made more of that time. And I think the other thing is I really loved my time in college. And I wish that I would have had someone like tell me on day one, these are going to be some of the best days of your life. And these are going to be some of your best friends that you'll have for the rest of your life. And I just wish that someone had kind of like sat me down and said, these next 4 years, they're going to fly by. So make the most of them and be ready when it comes time to graduate to kind of be able to go, that was a great time. Now it's on to the next stage.
All right. And going forward, at this part of the podcast, I like to talk about the finish line, right? But not so much the finish line where it all ends, but going forward 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, Chris, what do you have planned for yourself?
Well, I want to keep growing the YouTube channel. Got the silver play button here, which, was really cool.
Congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Thank you. You're next, man.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
So I want to continue making the YouTube videos and continue making the content that I enjoy making and, hopefully get to, well, not hopefully, the plan is to get to 1 million subscribers on there. I want to host a show that people that are listening or watching this right now are aware of or can flick on the TV tonight and go, oh, that's the guy from Ross's podcast.
Yes.
So that is also the goal, 5, 10, 20 years from now. But my goal every day has always been to be excited for what I'm going to do that day and then be proud of what I've accomplished at the end of the day. And if I can continue doing that every single day, I think that that's really the definition of having a successful life.
Powerful stuff, man. Powerful stuff. Now, Chris, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, man. You've dropped so many golden nuggets, so much value. I know the listeners are going to absolutely love this episode.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So much for that. Yeah, man, absolutely. I ask every guest this same question, and I would like to ask you if that's all right. The question, I ask that you take a few seconds to just think about the answer. Are you ready for it?
I think so.
All right, Chris. In your entire life so far, what has been the absolute best advice that you've ever received?
Best advice I've ever received probably came from an interview I did with John Cena. And obviously, he's one of the biggest names in wrestling, and now he's really making his mark in the acting world. And he said something to me that was so profound, and it stuck with me ever since I did that interview. And he said, control the controllable. And I think that in life, especially with what's going on right now in the world, too many people are focused on the things that they have zero control over. And they're wasting their energy on things that really don't matter. And if you can just control the controllable, if you can focus on the things that you actually have control over, I think that not only will you be happier, but you'll be more successful too.
Great advice. Control the controllable. From John Cena, who's a legend, by the way, right?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. There's a funny YouTube video. I laugh literally every time I see this where they, I don't remember what it was for, but there's like a backdrop and they bring up these kids to like do their best John Cena impression. And then he just rips through the backdrop and the kids like freak out. I think it's the funniest, coolest video. Man.
I remember seeing that. That video went viral.
Yeah, it did. The kid's face is priceless. For the listeners out there, if you haven't seen it, check it out. Chris, I know that the listeners are going to want to check you out on YouTube. They're going to want to follow you. What's the best place for them to do so?
Ross, thank you again for having me on. This has been such a pleasure. And I'm at Chris Van Vliet, VanVliet, on Instagram, Facebook, and of course on YouTube and Twitter as well. So yeah, it'd be great if you could give me a follow on there.
Absolutely. And we'll link that in the show notes. Chris, enjoy the rest of your day, brother. Thanks again. And we'll chat soon.
Dude, I really appreciate it. Thank you again, Ross.
Absolutely, man. Take care, brother.